that was mentioned was a time to remain silent, a time to speak, and of course this is under the category of the power of speech. The reason that it was chosen for Pesach is obvious. Pesach is actually a makeup of two words, Pesach, a mouth that speaks. And while it's true that this is something that we should devote and focus attention on all year, but on Pesach there's a very large emphasis that should be placed on Pesach, the art and the power of speech. And I deliberately divided the talk into half, the time to remain silent and the time to speak will become clear as we go on. Perhaps the biggest raya, the proof that one could need, that it's these days that we have to focus on the power of speech. There are so many tie-ins between Pesach and Tisha B'Av. People are well aware that the first night of Pesach, the night of the Seder, if Chalil in a few months we're still suffering from Tisha B'Av, that's the night that Tisha B'Av falls out on. By example, this year the first Seder and the first day of Pesach was Friday night Shabbos. If Chalila, God forbid, we're still in Golus in a few months in the month of Av, Tisha B'Av falls out on Friday night and Shabbos. Of course, we don't have it then. It becomes a nidcha to Sunday. And there are so many correlations and tie-in between the two. Most notably, at the center of the Ka'ara, the Seder plate, we have an egg. And the egg is, of course, what one eats before Tisha B'Av. Perhaps that explains the tie-in we mentioned a moment ago. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and the reason we're still in Golus is because of Lashon Hara. Because people haven't realized the power of speech, of Lashon Hara, of Rechilus, of Einas Dvorim, of Meitzi Shemra, of verbal abuse. It shatters marriages, it dissolves partnerships, it destroys families, irreparably damages communities. And that's why we have Tisha B'Av. So if there's such a correlation between Pesach and Tisha B'Av, then Pesach would seem the most apropos time. I want to reiterate, it's true that we focus on Shmiras HaLashon all year, but there's a heavy emphasis put on Pesach, Pesach. Have you learned the power of speech? A time to remain silent and a time to speak. The most appropriate time to do this in heavy dosage would be Pesach, so that that correlation between Pesach and Tisha B'Av can become, we were once redeemed in Nisan, Be'ezras Hashem, we will once again be redeemed in Nisan, and then Tisha B'Av will indeed be turned, Kara Alai Mayed, into a Yom Tov. How do we accomplish this? Let's start with the power of speech, and by that I'm referring to a time to remain silent. We know that in the Torah, when we find the ways of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the punishment is measure for measure, midah keneged midah. Can you explain to me how, pray tell, that's the punishment for someone who speaks Lashon Hara? His punishment is tzaras, biblical leprosy. How does that work? Well, I take the man to the Kohen looks at the neg on his arm, and he determines if it's tzaras or not. How in the world is that a punishment, measure for measure, for a person who spoke Lashon Hara? I once saw a very, very powerful shot. Let's analyze for a minute the person who spoke negative about a fellow person, about a fellow Jew. Hey, chill out, relax. Take it easy. I don't do it often, and it was only one word. Only one word. It's not a big deal. You're getting carried away with the Lashon Hara thing. It ain't such a big deal. I want to bring you over to a kohen. You ever meet this guy before? Never met him. You have no idea who he is? Never saw him. Measure for measure. He's going to look at the neg on your arm, and he's going to say just one word. Tahar or tameh. You're he says, Tahar, you can stay. Just one word. Now you who spoke Lashon Hara, you still don't believe in the power of just one word? You were very quick before to say just one word. Why aren't you talking now? Measure for measure, the person who doesn't believe in the power of one word, his entire future and fate lies in the balance of just one word. And the truth is today, one cannot even make the comment I did that it's just one word, and who will find out about it? With the advances of modern technology, a person can send an email or a text or whatever it might be, and with that one word and the one press of a button, your comment just went to tens of thousands of people. He's shattered, he destroys, he's irreparably damaged. Thanks, because of you. There is no topic, none, about which I am more closely associated and maybe even as passionate about as well, I don't want to say as Lashon Hara. I'll tell you what once happened. Somebody, I have the schus to be very, very tied in, like family, with the CCHF, the Chavetz Chaim Heritage Foundation. We spoke about your family earlier today, your great uncle. I give a shir for them, amongst others, every day of my life at 11 o'clock. Obviously not Shabbos and Yom Tov. I've been giving that shir now for about 13 or 14 years. It's 2 halachos a day following the calendar. Sometimes what I do is maybe a bit misunderstood. One of my misfalim was in New York and Brooklyn a bit ago, and he met a yid who said, you know Rabbi Schapiro? Every day my secretary, at 11 o'clock, she stops whatever she's doing. At 11 o'clock, and she runs to the phone and she dials to listen to Rabbi Schapiro speak Lashon Hara. I think Rabbi Schapiro speaks against him. There's nothing about which I'm more passionate or tied in, not to Lashon Hara, but to Shmiras HaLashon. Just one word. Can you explain to me the following? Yosef is about to reveal his identity to his brothers. And we know that he sent all of the Egyptians out of the room. Why did he do that? So that when he revealed his identity to his brothers, they wouldn't be embarrassed amongst the Egyptians. The Medrash says, L'sakona gedayla, he placed himself in a tremendous, tremendous danger. Because without anybody else in the room, the brothers could have killed him, they could have harmed him, and nobody would have known a perfect alibi. He put himself in untold danger. Why did he do that? And the Medrash tells us, because if he would have kept them in the room and revealed his identity while the Egyptians were there, the brothers would have been embarrassed. The brothers would have been pained about the words that were spoken and what had happened. And Yosef said, it's just not worth it. Let me ask you another question. We know the relationship Yaakov had with Yosef. They were essentially one. When finally, at the age of 130, Yaakov sees that Yosef is still alive, the remaining 17 years of Yaakov's life, they live together in Egypt. Imagine they both live on Ahmed Boulevard. I want to ask you, the relationship, how many times in 17 years did Yosef visit Yaakov in his home? People visit their parent every day if they live down the block, so that's 300 plus times a year, times 17 years, you're north of 5,000. If he visited his parent twice a day, which some people do, 10,000. Every other day, about 3. How many times did he visit Yaakov in the privacy of his home? The answer is between 3,000, 5,000, 10,000. The right answer is never. Not once. And Chazal tell us that in 17 years, although they saw each other in public places and when others were around, he never visited his father when it was a private setting because he was afraid that they would be sitting. And maybe at some point the conversation would turn to the family, and maybe Yaakov Avinu. The conversation would turn to the missing years. What happened during those years? And then Yosef would have to speak negatively about his brothers, and he said the 4 words that I told you a moment ago. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. Imagine they're together for 17 years. Of course, there was the most kibbud of that was possible, but privately he never went to the home. He never wanted the conversation to turn to his brothers to be put in a situation because it's just not worth it. And so you'll tell me, well, that's the way Yosef was with his brothers. And people tend to treat brothers or family in a loving way. I'll share with you a pshat from the Sifarno that is beyond. Yosef is in the palace, and the wife of Potiphar tries to get him to commit an aveira. He runs away, and the Pasuk says, Vayanos vayetze hachutza. And the Mefarshim ask, what's with the double lashon? Vayanos vayetze. They mean the same thing. Vayanos vayetze. He ran out. Why the double lashon? The Sifarno tells us, and if you watch, I'll try to even act it out a bit. Vayanos denotes when a person flees mamish 1,000,000 miles an hour. He ran out of the palace to get out of her grip, to get away from the Aveira, to get away from Abra's Potiphar. Vayanos, he ran. But once he ran into the street, what would have happened, Rabbi Ephraim, if he would have continued running and running? And you see somebody running, what happened? You okay? What happened? Are you all right? What tell me what happened. So when he got outside, he stopped. Vayetze hachutza. He walked out slowly, deliberately, and methodically, so as not to attract attention, because he didn't want to speak negatively. About who? Ashes Potiphar. Because it's just not worth it. I had this chus a few years ago when I was in Radin, in the Chavetz Chaim's yeshiva. I gave these words in this talk. A few months later, I was in New York. Someone picked me up to bring me to an event for an organization I was speaking at. And I was in the passenger seat, and I see on the dashboard is a yellow sticky note that says in a black Sharpie, it's just not worth it. I said to the driver, that's an amazing expression. He says, yeah, I love it. I try to live by it. Where'd you get that expression from? He didn't know who I was. He said, I'm listening to a CD of somebody who spoke a few months ago on Radin, Rabbi Schapiro. I asked him, was it a good speech? I shouldn't have done that because it might have led to Lashon Hara. But the truth is, it's just not worth it. There is a time to remain silent. I remember hearing from Michael Rothschild how there was a man who in his 50s, his name was Kenny, he made a siyum on a small masechta, and he confided in somebody, I hadn't made a siyum in about 40 years, I really didn't learn Gemara. In other words, since pre-bar mitzvah he buzzed out. Why? And he confided in the person because it was that day in 7th grade. My name is Kenny, and I couldn't understand the Gemara. Again and again, the Rebbe tried, and it didn't go in. And the Rebbe turned to me and said, you know, your parents named you Kenny, but seeing that you have a head where nothing goes in, instead of naming you Kenny, they should have named you Kenish. Could you imagine a person couldn't remain silent? I don't even want to dignify that man by saying the Rebbe. He doesn't deserve that title. You got in your cute, sarcastic, cynical, facetious witticism, and you turned the kid off for 40 years. There's a time to remain silent because it's just not worth it. And so the next time you or I want to answer back, I our spouse, or our sibling, or our child, or our neighbor, and we have to get in that sarcastic, cynical, facetious remark. Remind yourself, it may very well be that it's just not worth it. At the same time, Rabbi Rothschild, he should live and be well, told me about a venerated Machana who told his daughter who was teaching, there's going to be a lot of times when we want to say something, but remember these words that we just said, don't say it. She called her father in the middle of the year and she said, Tati, you saved me. You saved me. And she was sobbing. Earlier in the day, she teaches 3rd, 4th grade girls. The girl handed in her homework and there was an exemption note. Please excuse my daughter, she didn't do the homework. It was so sloppy and messy. And the note said that it was signed by the father, but I knew that the kid wrote it. It was so messy. And I was about to say, who are you kidding? Who are you playing? What are you talking? But I remembered your words. It's just not worth it. Remain silent. The power of a word. And so I didn't say anything to the girl about how messy the note was. It was probably written by her, not her father. She gets back to her seat, and at this point, the teacher's mom is choked up telling her father, Tati, she got back to her seat and she raised her hand and she said, oh, I'm so sorry that the note is so messy. It was written by my father. My father is blind, and because he's blind, it doesn't come out neatly. Tati, you saved me. I want to tell you, this past year when I had the privilege to lead a tour to Italy, in Venice, in a restaurant I was giving over the 2 stories I just told you. And a woman came over to me, and I told her, of course, I wouldn't use her name or where it happened, but it happened with her. In a particular cheder for the young children, this woman teaches the kindergarten children. And so every day she would remind them, put your right hand over your eyes and say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And she does this every day. She notices that in the front row, a little boy will call him Moshe. Moshe never does it, and every day it's the same drill. Pick up your right hand, put it over your eyes, pick up your right hand, put it over your eyes. He never did it. Finally, after a number of weeks, she says, Moshe, every day I tell everyone to pick up their right hand and cover their eyes. Why don't you do it? And he looks at the woman. She told me the story. If it wasn't so hard to believe in unimaginable, you'd cry. He looked at her, this lady who told it to me, and said, because I don't have a right hand. What are you talking about? I'm looking at you. You have 2 right hands. You have 2, I'm sorry, you have 2 hands, right? Everything perfect. What are you talking about? So he looked at her and said, no, because every day when I'm late for school and I either knock over the milk or I trip or I can't tie my shoes, my mother says to me, Moshe, you have 2 left hands. And so I don't have a right hand with which I can say Kriya Shema. Maisa Shahaya Kahaya. I heard it from the lady herself. True, we're more familiar with the expression 2 left feet. I understand that. What type of comment is that for a parent to make to a child? Keep making the comment to the child, you have 2 left hands, the child will believe they don't have a right hand, and they have to don't say, Kabbalah Malchus Shemayim. There's a time to remain silent, because it's just not worth it. If we would think about the pain that we are caused when that comment that seems so funny, sarcastic, facetious, cynical to others, but when I was the root of it, it wasn't so funny. My pillow was soaked with tears in the morning because it's just not worth it. And so clearly there is a time to remain silent. A number of years ago, Shabbos afternoon, I was learning the Sugya in Gemara called Oina'as Mamayin. Oina'as Mamayin is a Sugya where you're not allowed to abuse someone monetarily. And Hashem gave me, this must be between 15 and 20 years ago, the siyata d'shmaya to think of the following, and I literally said it to people, gedalim, literally around the country, around the globe. We learn out oina'as dvarim, which is verbal abuse, from oina'as mamay. That's where we learn it from. Oina'as dvarim is learned from oina'as mamay. You cannot verbally abuse someone is learned from not monetarily abusing them. And then it hit me. The Torah says there are two ways that one is in violation of oina'as mamay. One is, don't you dare overcharge a certain amount, and one is, don't underpay. Overcharging is obviously unfair to the one who's making the purchase. Underpaying is obviously unfair to the one selling the item. By oina'as mamay, there are two things that are bad. Two things you can't do. Don't overcharge and don't underpay. And then it hit me Shabbos afternoon. If we learn oina'as mamay from oina'as dvarim from oina'as mamay, then wouldn't it stand to reason that the two things you're not allowed to do by oina'as mamay, don't do by verbal abuse. Don't overcharge and don't underpay. Overcharging would be what we've spoken about in the first half, when you talk and get in the comment and the snide remark. Don't overcharge, be quiet. But equally as important, might I humbly add, maybe even more important, never, ever, ever underpay. Underpay means when you should have spoken, but you remain silent. After I thought of this, that we learned it from oina'as mamay, somebody showed me that the Zohar says, of course I'm saying it in English, but the Zohar HaKadosh says these words: the same punishment that awaits a person for speaking words when he should have been silent, equal to that is the punishment for being silent when you should have spoken up. I had the privilege to be mechavan to those words of the Zohar. I know a lot of people speak about not overcharging. I don't know if we talk often enough about don't underpay. I needed that comment. I was defenseless. You know what the words "I'm sorry" would have meant to me? Thank you, I miss you, I care about you, let's make amends, pick up the phone, let's try again, you can count on me, nafshi tsura b'nafshecha. Don't underpay. Equal to someone who violates overcharging is someone who violates underpaying. We got to speak about it more often, because the power of not underpaying. Had you said, thank you, I'm sorry, you know I really care about you. I said this over in Florida a few years ago, and somebody came over to me and told me, can I give you living proof of not underpaying? The Rebbe himself told me this story. A bit ago, a few years earlier, he had passed someone early in the morning, a teenager he didn't know, and he gave him a big good morning, and he happened to say to the teenager, you got a delicious smile. You got a great smile. Later that night, the Rebbe is in the house, there's a knock on his door. And he opens the door, and it's that teenager. The teenager he didn't know, tracked him down, found his name, his address, and he asked us if I could speak to you. He starts speaking, and he starts to cry, and he says to the Rebbe, you don't know me, but I want to tell you this morning, it was going to be the last day of my life. I was planning today, he said, to end my life. Nobody notices, nobody cares, but you turned to me, and you said good morning and told me I have a great smile. You gave me this belief in myself, this feel in myself. In other words, you didn't underpay. I want you to know that I'm alive because of you. And they made a chavrusa shop, and the two are still learning together today. I'll never get tired of saying it. Pesach is Pesach. Don't overcharge, and please, please, don't underpay, because not underpaying and speaking up, now that is just so worth it. In fact, perhaps for a moment, I can now share with you the first of the stories I told you about Rabbi Yankiv Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, that I would share with you. When one doesn't underpay, everyone will take notice. And I don't just mean in Klal Yisrael. Perhaps I could give it over best before the Rabbi Yankiv story, but something that happened with me. It was about 21 years ago. It was my father's first yard site. He's buried in Eretz Yisrael. I have sisters, but I'm an only son. I'm the youngest. So the whole trip, the first yard site, was extremely, extremely emotional. I took a flight from Fort Lauderdale to Newark, Continental, and then to Ben Gurion. I'm now in the the layover in Newark, and then I hear the announcement on the phone that you never want to hear. They said, Mr. Schapiro, please come to the nearest Continental counter. You never want to hear that. First yard site, I'm a ball of emotions. I start saying to Hillel. As I get there, they motion that I should go over to a woman. You can see from the way she presents herself, she's the top supervisor. Now I'm saying to Hillel at twice the speed. She says, give me your ticket. In front of me, I kid you not, she ripped it up. By now, if I could, I would have gone through to Hillel twice. She punches on the computer a little bit, and then she hands me a ticket and says, enjoy your flight. We bumped you from coach, economy, through business. It's a first-class ticket. I'm looking around for the hidden cameras. I probably shouldn't have asked. I should have taken the ticket and run. But I said, what's the pshat? I didn't say, what's the pshat? She wouldn't know that word. I said, what's going on? She said, you see that lady over there? I said, of course, that's the lady that checked me in about a half hour ago. We oversold economy coach by one seat. Normally, we put all the names in the computer, and whoever it generates and spits out, that's the one that gets the first-class ticket. I'm the supervisor, and I was about to do that, and she said to me, stop! Don't do what we usually do. I know you're the supervisor, but let's bump Schapiro. Because I checked everybody in for this flight, but he's the only one. When I gave him back his ticket, he looked at me and said, thank you so much and have a great day. For that, I think we should bump Schapiro. I looked at the supervisor, I said, how are you? It's nice to see you. She said, Schapiro, don't push it. But yes, we are a first-class nation. We are Mamleches Kayamim V'Gai Kadosh. We are the Am HaNivchar. And everyone is looking to see how we speak and how we talk, and we don't underpay. We have opportunities each and every day to be Marbekoi, Shamayim, don't underpay, say thank you, recognize, validate, and acknowledge, because we are all first class. By the way, I tried it twice since, it hasn't worked. We were privileged in South Florida that many, many Gedolim used to spend part of the winter by us. B'Roisham, the Bikeach Hador, as my father referred to Rabbi Yankiv, the wise man of our generation. Rabbi Yankiv would come and spend part of the winter in the Sovereign Hotel. That's where most of the Gedolim stayed. I cannot even tell you how many times my father would take me to Rabbi Yankiv. If you'd like, just a 30-second nugget. Nothing to do with the topic, but on one of those trips, when Rabbi Yankiv was walking my father out of the room in the Sovereign to the elevator, he was being malava my father. He told my father a word, and then he said to my father, my zikaron, my memory is not what it was. My father said, Rabbi Yankiv, Yeshiva vos is. He said, because I told you this exact same word 7 years ago. So my father said, how bad could the memory be if you remember you told it to me 7 years ago? But Rabbi Yankiv was feeling badly. Rabbi Yankiv at the time was 93. there's a Gemara that speaks about a spark that can come out from under a hammer, an anvil. Getz hayetze mitachas hapatish. Getz is spelled Gimel Tzadi, which is the Gematria 93. So my father told Rabbi Yaakov, Getz hayetze mitachas hapatish, the spark is still there. I was there for that Maisa. I have said the following Maisa over many, many times in front of our Gadol Hadorik Shmuel Kamenetsky, Zoler Gesundem Stark Sein, in front of Reb Shmuel's son, Reb Shalom, Zoler Gesundem Stark Sein. In fact, just a few weeks ago, by the bris I mentioned earlier of our grandson who was in the Philadelphia Yeshiva, I had the privilege to speak at Shalosh Shudas. Reb Shmuel was right here, and once again I said over this Maisa. It was a few years ago during the Hanukkah break that the children had, and I made a mistake that I don't think a husband ever makes a second time in his life. And I don't mean forgetting a birthday or anniversary. My wife asked me if I wanted to go to J.C. Penney, I assume they have that on the West Coast, for family portraits. And in a moment of clearly not thinking, I said yes. Because it was also the non-Jewish holiday week, and so we were there with what felt like 7 billion people. I've never made that mistake again. After waiting what seemed endlessly, my children and I waited outside the store, if you're familiar in Florida, in North Miami, the Aventura Mall. Outside the J.C. Penney, there were a row of white chairs right before the exit. I said, kids, let's go outside, I'll tell you stories, we'll talk. In the first chair was sitting a black woman, an African-American woman in her 70s. I sat 2 seats over my kids, and obviously turned to her and said, Happy Holidays. She turned to me and said, Happy Hanukkah, mit der ganze Hanukkah. I said, that was amazing. How do you do that? She said, I used to answer the phone in the 1970s. I'm living in Miami 47 years. In the 70s and 80s, we had a strip of hotels, the Crown, the Caribbean, the Saxony, the Sovereign, Aleim HaShalom. None of them exist anymore. In the 70s and early 80s, I used to answer the phone in the Sovereign Hotel. Some of you may know that one of Rabbi Yankov's grandchildren writes up a similar story, but it is not this story. This one happened with me. She says, I used to answer the phone there, and I was surrounded by great rabbis all day, and she was talking. I don't know why, something in me, something deep in my kishkas, I needed to know, does the lady remember the Gadol Hador of Yankov Kamenetsky? She's talking, and then she speaks about one rabbi that was just the greatest of them all. A rabbi that was so kind to us and polite in every word he said, and we knew not to shake his hand. So I said to myself, Ephraim Elio, now's your chance. So I turned to her and said, Miss, by chance, do you remember the name of the rabbi you're talking about? Now, she looked at me like I was crazy, and she had every right to. I'm asking her for the particular name of a rabbi from over 40 years ago. Like, it's such a ridiculously silly question. She had every right to look at me like she should know the name of one rabbi over the other. And after what seemed like an eternity, as if I was crazy, she said to me, do I know that rabbi's name? I'm talking about Rabbi Kamenetsky. Who did you think I was talking about? You couldn't figure out I was talking about Rabbi Kamenetsky? And she got on to say the Rashiva of Teravadas, who lived in Muncie, my brother Mayetzis, he wrote Emes Layankin. I probably would have passed out. She got up to leave because her son was waiting to take her home. But my children saw that I couldn't stop crying. But they knew why. I said to my kids, do we remember what we had for breakfast a week ago or what we wore a month ago? Here's a black woman in her 70s who remembers Rabbi Yankiv perfectly almost half a century later. I said to my kinderlach, I hope that's true about us. People will remember us, the way we act, the way we behave, the way we interact, the way we speak. Don't underpay. Because your family, your spouse, the unaffiliated, and the whole world is watching. Please, I beg you, on the Yom Tov of Pesach, never, ever underpay. I'll tell you a story that happened to me about 10 years ago. If you had to say one story that combines the art of not underpaying and not overcharging, it would be this story. About 10 years ago, and some of you may have seen it or heard it, about 10 years ago, one of our daughters finished taking midterms in Beis Yaakov. She had an hour free, so my wife and I took her to a Milchit restaurant for lunch. While we were sitting there trying to place our order, our attention was grabbed. Maybe where that speaker is, about 15 feet away or so, there were 4 young women, married women, who were embarrassingly yelling at their waiter. They were lambasting the kid. I remember the 2 things they accused him of. Number 1, in the country we come from, I don't want to say the name of the country, it would be Lashon Hara on an entire country. Where we come from, for lunch we get a drink, hot and cold, not warm. And then they yelled at him for what they felt was the Avi Avos HaTuma. And that was, by the way, just to be fair, because I don't want it to be Lashon Hara on myself. Since a number of people just walked in, and I don't want to speak Lashon Hara about me, while it was announced that Mincha's at 6, that was actually a mistake, because they said the speech, I don't mean the person who announced it, Mincha's actually at 6:15, and the talk goes till 6:15. So here I am, anybody walking in won't know that. He's going up. I'll have to be done on Kapskos that everybody knows, and they want the last 15 minutes till the proper Mincha time at 6:15. Then they yelled at the waiter for the Avi Avos HaTuma. You call this cheese? Where we come from, we get much more cheese than this. Get it back to the kitchen. I was literally frozen in place. Frozen in place. Had I not been frozen until today, it pains sometimes, I should have walked over to the 4 young married women and said, ladies, get out. As a Rav in this Kehillah, I'm telling you, get out. Don't you ever, ever, and I mean ever, speak to anyone that way. Get out. A young Israeli waiter in his 20s, but I was so frozen I didn't. He starts to tear and he goes back to the kitchen. My wife says to me, Ephraim Eliyahu, ask him for a bracha. You know what the Gadol Ador of Chaim Kanievsky says based on the Gemara and Shabbos. One who's embarrassed and humiliated but doesn't answer back. That person has the power to give a bracha. Ask him for a bracha. It's always good advice to listen to your wife, especially when it's being recorded. And so I called him over, and I said to him, what's your name? He said, Shoam. Shoam is 23, from Eretz Yisrael. I said, Shoam teseli tova, 3 words. Ten li bracha. He jumps back. You're making a joke out of me? I should give a bracha? Actually, I just realized the ones who heard my announcement about Mincha 2 minutes ago can do me an enormous favor and tell everyone who's coming now, psst, the right time for Mincha is 6:15. So this way I can not have it on my mind. So be my ambassador and tell anybody who walks in, 6:15 is Mincha. give me a bracha. You're making a joke out of me. I'm a waiter. What? I said, I'm not kidding. And I told him, you were humiliated, you were embarrassed, you were turned into a shmata, you were raked over the coals. Give me a bracha. He gave us a bracha. The three of us answered a resounding amen. Shoam leaves. He comes back 5 minutes later, and he's sobbing. Can I speak to you? I said, of course. He says, I grew up in Eretz Yisrael. At the age of 7, I wasn't so interested, so instead of learning, I brought in a comic book. And at 13, I did this. At 16, I moved to America. I married a Jewish woman from Argentina, not religious. None of us are religious now. I've been away from my family on the path of Yiddishkeit for 17 years. And then he says, but I'm ready to be Chazer B'Tshuva. I know what? You believed I had the power to give a bracha. You believed in me. I'm ready to be Chazer B'Tshuva. I quickly made a phone call to somebody in our kollel, and they started to learn B'Chavrusa. Shalom and his wife went to Eretz Yisrael to a bezdin to redo parts of their marriage. They became people who managed run to shiurim. How did I feel a year later? Well, I got a phone call from Shoam. We had a baby boy. Tomorrow morning is the bris. Rav, can you come to the bris? That's what happens when you don't overcharge and you don't underpay. Shoam remained silent. He didn't overcharge. I listened to my wife. I spoke up. I didn't underpay. Do you know how many nights I lie awake wondering, Ribono Shalaylam, what would have been with Shoam? Well, no, I'm changing that. What would have been with me, with us, if somebody would have overcharged and somebody would have underpaid? That's the power of when someone doesn't overcharge and doesn't underpay. I did a video of this story. A few years ago, I got a phone call from a woman from New Jersey. I told her I wouldn't say her name or what city she's from, and she says, I want to thank you. I said, you're very welcome. I was ready to hang up. She said, don't you want to know what I'm thanking you for? I said, no, I take any thank you. I'm like really happy with thank yous. I'll tell you. I'm calling to say thank you for being my daughter Shatchen. I said, I don't even know you, but I know you. You know that video that you did? I saw that video. The video of the story I just told you with Shoam. And this Rabbi Ephraim is what she told me. They had a daughter in Shidduchim that they were literally giving up hope because there was a misunderstanding of the daughter's medical condition, which I'm obviously not going into, but it was a misunderstanding about her medical condition. And they were mamish having years, they were giving up in desperation. A few months earlier, she says that it was around Yom Kippur time, and she hears that that day a woman in carpool was yelled at by a man in front of 100 people, and she remained silent. She just saw the video. So she quickly called and got the name of that lady and said, I know you don't know me, and I don't know what happened today, but I heard you were embarrassed, and you remained silent. I just saw a video with Rabbi Schapiro and Shoam, you remain silent, you have the power of a bracha. We have a daughter in Shidduchim, we're giving up. Please, please, it's Erev Yom Kippur, give me a bracha. The lady started to sob that she had the power to give a bracha. She says, it's Yom Kippur in 2 days. You daven for me, I'll daven for your daughter. She should do a shidduch. Before Sukkot, they got a phone call from a boy and the family that they had wanted for a very long time, but the misunderstanding medically didn't allow it, and the family and the boy said yes. This phone call happened during Hanukkah. It's now 2 months later, and she said, Rabbi Schapiro, my daughter got engaged last night, and so I want to thank you for being the shadchan. I obviously cannot take any credit, but I could say, I know Shoam Part 1, it happened with me. She She told me show on part 2. It would be really, really nice for this Pesach program and make my trip memorable. Go out and create show on part 3. Don't overcharge and don't underpay. Overcharging is just not worth it. And underpaying, but rather to speak up, is just so worth it. And now I want to end with that other Maisa that I told you. You might be listening and wondering, what does it take? Can I make an effective difference? I'm just one person. After all, didn't you start by saying it's just one word? Is that like really such a big deal? Many people know my father Zatzal lived in Eretz Yisrael, Tavshin Yud Aleph Yud Beis and Yud Gimel, 1951 to 1953, almost 70 years ago. He was considered the Ben Bayis by Mrs. Alman Meltzer, known as Hort Chalekwitter. He had a chance, as you may have heard in other talks, to have over 150 private visits with the Chazon Ish, because our family cousin is Rav Shlenke Berman, a son-in-law of the Steitler and a nephew of the Chazon Ish. And so my father's relationship with Rabbi Zalman and the Chazon Ish and the Gesher HaChaim, Rabbi Chilnach Tukatinsky with the Brisker, he went for a daily walk with Rabbi Sion Yadler, the Maggid of the Altstadt from Yerushalayim. I'm privileged to have the original of that diary. It's Erev Shabbos, 1951. My father is walking in Tel Aviv on a wide boulevard called Rehov Allenby. My father notices that on the other side of the street is a green wooden kiosk. A kiosk is an outside stand where someone will sell papers and chocolate and drinks. And my father is very, very intrigued by this man. He's a very elderly gentleman with a long white beard, and my father notices he's shuffling like this, like this, like this. He never stops learning. Mishnayos Meiser Sheni. You want an item, he gave you the item. He took your money, he gave you a bag, he gave you the change. He never stopped learning. My father realized this is not a pasha tehid. I will tell you at the next part of the story, it's written up in probably almost 40 different papers and books. In some places it's written with inaccuracies. Because my father was the quintessential Ish Emes, and as I said, I'm the only son, the youngest, I always feel the achrayus of giving it over, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, exactly how the next part happened. My father goes over and sees that a young man went over and said to this elderly man, I want to buy cigarettes. He asked the man what time it was Erev Shabbos, he said it's 12:15. So the man said, Slicha, imkein, ani lo mocher sigariyot achrei chatzot b'erev Shabbat. I'm not selling it after Chatzos. In other words, he was afraid if he sells it now, maybe the young guy will smoke it on Shabbos, Chilul Shabbos. My father realized this is a special person. He goes over to the man, he says, what's your name? And the man says, Yankel Oxenkrug. He says to my father, what's your name? Mordechai Schapiro. Where do you learn? Lakewood. Who's your Rosh Yeshiva? Rabbi Ephraim Schapiro. This is the next line in this conversation. There is a number of, but this is how it happened. Hearing the name Rabbi Ephraim, the man says to my father, "Nu, was ist geworden von ihm? What became of him? What became of Rabbi Ephraim? Rabbi Ephraim is the Sar HaTorah, the prince of the Torah world. World Jewry is forever changed because of Rabbi Ephraim." And the man cried joyous tears. My father asked him why, and he said, decades ago I was a butcher in Minsk. I wasn't able to learn as much as I wanted to because I was busy in the butcher shop, so I made up that for every kilo of meat that I sold, I would put a kopeka. A kopeka is like a penny, maybe small, inconsequential, insignificant, in a jar. After a few years, I sold thousands of kilos of meat. I had in 4 jars thousands and thousands of kopikas. I put it on a wagon and I wheeled it to the local cheder. I told the head of the cheder, send 2 boys that have Iluya heads to learn in the yeshiva of Slobodka. And one of the 2 that went with my kopikas was Arkila Svislitzer. Arkila was the nickname, the name of Rabbi Aaron in his youth, from the city Svislitz of his youth. It was a reference to Rabbi Aaron Kotler. My father stared. Here's a man whose kopikas were responsible for Rabbi Aaron. Here's a man, the kopikas add up and add up and add up. You think it's inconsequential and insignificant? The man was responsible for Rabbi Aaron, and the rest is history. Many years later, when my parents were living in Miami Beach, very often Wednesday evening, the Gadol Hador, the Bikeach Hador, Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky came for dinner by my parents. One evening before dinner, my father was talking to Rabbi Yankov in his office, and he recounted this story about Yankel Oxenkrug, who was responsible for sending 2 boys with Iluya heads to learn in Slobodka, and one was Rabbi Aaron. And Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky stops my father and says, yeah, Reb Mordechai, that's exactly how the story goes. And I know, because I'm the second boy that went with those kopikas. A man's kopikas were responsible for Reb Aaron and for Reb Yankov and changed world Jewry forever. That's the power of something small adding up. That's the power of something that seems inconsequential or insignificant making a difference for perpetuity. It should be the will of the Ribono Shel Olam. Pesach is a time of Pesach to revisit the power of speech. Don't overcharge. Don't underpay. And in that schus, this Tisha B'Av will already be Zaycha, having corrected the ills of Lashon Hara, Rechilas, Meizi Shemar, verbal abuse, to replace it with Kedushas HaPeh and Shmiras HaLashon. So Ultaka B'Zaycha, Purim, everyone says, Afreilach and Purim. Pesach, everyone says, Akosher and Pesach. Shavuos, some people say, Amilchig Shavuos. I want to be Zaycha to a Fleishig Tisha B'Av, B'Mheira and B'Yamin. Which Aaron